Hi, folks. Welcome to the Disciple Dilemma. As promised, today's episode is a conversation with a nun, someone who is no longer affiliated with the church, but has some spiritual beliefs. Conversation with a nun and with an undone nun. What in the world is an undone nun? Well, an undone nun is someone who walked out on the church and then came back to the faith. So that'll be an interesting conversation. We're talking with two professional women today, Libby and Jordan, based in Austin, Texas. They're both in the world of journalism. They make authors out of people. Normally, we like to talk to people who are authors of books, but this crowd, Jordan and Libby, are both in the professional business of writing many books for many authors across many subject lines. So they're pretty well read into the world, well informed. Two sharp people with a divergent point of view. And the conversation today with Raymond and I is to understand what is it that makes someone become a nun who is a follower of the one, Jesus, and what makes a nun become undone and come back. So we hope you'll enjoy this conversation with these two wonderful women. And in full disclosure, one of them, Libby, is my daughter. So you're going to get a pretty straightforward conversation. I don't think she's going to pull any punches because her dad's around, but Ray will predominantly lead the conversation just because we want to have a little bit of space between father and daughter on this and allow the conversation to flow. I hope it's useful for you. Let's tune in as we pick this up with Libby, with Jordan, and with Ray on a conversation with a nun and an undone nun.
Your age group really hates labels like nun and done and undone. One of the first things I wanted to do is give you both a chance to rant about your life in the church, because that would be helpful to me and that would help sort of pull things out a little bit.
Well, I grew up going to church. My family took me to church on Christmas and Easter every year. And, I have never not known about God or Jesus. And, but it wasn't until I became an adult that, I ever read the Bible or learned about applying scripture in my life. So even though I had this history of participating in church and going through youth groups and doing Wednesday night potlucks at church and all of these different activities where, there was a community, none of it was ever built on anything more than just being around people, which is definitely, I think that's an important part. But it's, when I look back, it's crazy to me that I didn't have any kind of understanding of church or of Christianity until I became an adult and I kind of sought it out myself. So I've experienced this. I church shopped when I got to Austin and was looking for a church and, shopped around and went to different services, listened to different people. I've definitely gone through phases where, I don't really like the way that guy talks. So I'm going to find somewhere else. Right. And it wasn't until I really found a church home and feel really good about where I've landed.
Libby.
Many of the churches that I grew up in, there were a lot of people that wanted to just, pass the offering plate and, do the rituals and be done. And that was not what you were always looking for something deeper. And so I had that sort of foundation growing up of, searching for answers and thinking for yourself, thinking critically. And so, by the time I got to college, I did really start examining a lot of the things that I was raised to believe and a lot of the mindsets and mentalities that I was raised to have. And there were a lot of other things happening in that time as well, but I basically just determined that I didn't actually think or believe a lot of the fundamental principles that I'd been raised to have in myself. And I wanted to challenge those things for myself. And I did, and I'm still on a journey. I think everybody always is, but where I've ended up as an adult is outside of the church, and not interested in a lot of the core fundamental beliefs that the church has.
Would you consider your going away from the church something you left, or were you just going somewhere else and leaving that behind?
You mean, was it more intentional or just sort of something that happened?
I guess I was really going, was it more reaction to things that disturbed you about the church, or more of an attraction that other things seem to be more true or more authentic?
I would say both. I mean, I would say there's both of those elements are true for me. There's a lot of deep conversations with close friends of mine in college and after college, people that also grew up in the church, and who were, going through some of, what Jordan touched on, a lot of their own trauma from the church and what they've experienced and gone through and survived, and trying to kind of put their lives back together in whatever version they feel is right.
Could you guys give us an example or two, like an exit interview, some of the traumas that hit you as you were moving through teenage years and college years and then early adult years, just so we've got that on the conversation?
Yeah, for me, I around the time that I was in high school, I definitely started to feel like a relationship with God wasn't the thing that you got from going to church, that was a personal experience, and going to church was just, a thing that you did, and you sang some songs and someone talked, and but the relationship with God was a really personal thing. And so I not super intentionally, but walked away from the church because I didn't think that that's where I needed to be to have any kind of relationship with God. And then, this isn't my own experience, but I have several friends who either had a pastor, a youth pastor, someone who, they really looked up to and kind of idolized as someone who was the pinnacle of Christianity, who cheated on their spouse, or did something worse. I think there are a lot of examples of things like that happen. And when you are told, especially growing up in that environment, that these people are, kind of the pinnacle of what you aim to be, and they fall so far, that can be really damaging.
Whoa. And that was high school, college experience.
Yeah.
And so that's sending you out into intergalactic space, right? What pulled the orbit back toward the church in your mind?
Yeah. So for me personally, I was in a place in my mid-20s, and I just started to feel like something was missing in my life, and thought exploring church may be a thing to help me find what was missing. That ended up being the thing. But I think that whether it's like a midlife crisis or a quarter life crisis, or whatever it is, plenty of people find themselves in a situation where things just aren't sitting well, and there needs to be some kind of change. And for me, church was the thing that really kind of started to change things for me. But I'm sure everybody has different experiences there.
So what do you think, Libby? What do you think about, you grew up in the church, and a lot of your questions were about not having the forum.
Yeah, well, I think I did there was a lot of depth. At least in our household, for me and my family, just because, as you know, Dad is a debater and someone who encourages critical thinking. And so there was a lot of that. But one thing that I think really struck me later in life was the way that I was raised, and the way that I think the church operates, it's very black and white in many ways. And gray area isn't really a thing that exists. I think certain types of gray areas are becoming more prevalent as they bring in, a different type of community and a different vibe into these churches. But gray area is something that didn't exist for me intellectually in a religious sense growing up. And it was a place that I found myself a lot after, when I was in college and after college, where I was like, oh, I'm in this massive like limbo, no pun intended. So for me, that was just a gray area is sort of a comfortable place to be, where there's not really a solid answer for a lot of things. And I found myself watching people in the church who needed a definite answer one way or another on what they were experiencing, what they were going through. And I didn't agree with those answers.
Libby, fallen hero. I looked up to this pastor. We heard Jordan mention that a few minutes ago. An inadequate worldview, it just doesn't make sense, or anger with an unjust God. How do those mix into your place?
There are parts and pieces of all three of those that track with me. So, I mean, you're aware of specific events in, my life in, high school, where there were fallen heroes in my world. But there were also people in my immediate family that were very contradictory to the way I was raised. I mean, they were acting very contradictory, and it was something that I witnessed directly, contradictory to the way that you were raising me. And so that kind of does and doesn't apply in terms of like fallen heroes. I mean, because the concept of people being, fallen was a fundamental tenet of the Christianity I was raised to believe in. So that doesn't track for me. And then worldview being something like, was the second one you said, was this world doesn't make sense. Is that, am I angry at God? No, I find life to be a beautiful thing, and in pain and in joy, in all areas of it. It's kind of a sort of a mixed bag, and that's what makes it really cool. And it's difficult, and sometimes it's amazing, and sometimes it really sucks. And I find all of that to be just sort of a big puzzle that brings me joy. I would say I feel that the most strongly when it comes to a lot of churches in America. I would say that it depends. I think every church is different. I mean, you can talk about like capital C church and the way that the Bible defines it, but then there's, each individual church in America has a different way of thinking and expressing what they think. And I find a lot of hypocrisy in that often, certainly not with everyone and not every church. And I know that there's a lot of churches out there that do a lot of really good things in the world, but there's also a lot of churches out there that don't. And so kind of, I can get down on an individualized level and understand that everyone is different, every church is different. But then as a whole, how do you weigh and measure all of that? And I don't have a great answer for it.
Jordan, fallen heroes, inadequate worldviews, and just anger with God. How much of that recipe got into your thinking as a teenager and young collegian?
None of them. I don't really think that those apply to my experience. If anything, me walking away from church in high school and college, it was less about me like actively walking away and more about, I don't really need the institution to get all of the benefits, right? Like if the benefits I'm getting from church are community and a relationship with God, I can build community outside of church and I can still have a relationship with God. So I don't need church to like fill those buckets for me.
How would you two say your collegiate, post-collegiate view of the noble Christian narrative bugged you or kind of reeked a little bit? I heard some of that. Give me some thinking about any of that as an unsettling force for you.
I grew up in church and I knew all of the like Sunday school stories, but I didn't really have any knowledge of the Bible. I mean, I knew the
Wow.
Sunday school version of stories, which definitely like idolizes certain people and doesn't really point out their flaws and paints a really like basic picture of who people are and the role that they played, and doesn't really get into the complicated person that all of the different characters in the Bible are. And so I don't think that I really had a good understanding of any of that until I was well into adulthood.
If I told you that the goal of the Christian life was to take all the good things God gave us and share it with our neighbors out of love for them because God loves us, how does that fit with where you are right now and where you see the church having been in your life?
I think the church itself does a good job of saying this is not about perfection. It is about, love and sharing the things that God has given us, all these good, positive things. But I think when you get down to it fundamentally, the very principles of Christianity that I was raised in and that I perceived as a kid was, but there are lines, right? There are things that you, as my dad will say, you ought not do, right? So there's these sort of limitations to like the badness. And so while you can be bad and then you can repent, you can't keep going back and being bad and being bad and being bad. And obviously that's like a really surface level description of things that can get really complicated, right? So things like addiction and sex in throughout the church has a very specific role to play and not to play within like married couples and people in the church. So there's a lot there that I found to be I guess inaccurate when I looked at the people who were talking about it and then the people who were living it out or not living it out. And you look at someone like my dad, who always lived by the letter, always does, and he's always done a very good job of that and representing what he definitely walks the talk, I guess, his own talk, he walks it. So that's one thing, but I just found myself wholly unaligned with that walk at a certain point.
I love an Elon Musk quote in manufacturing when he says, when I have a great new idea, I realize right away that most of what I think about is probably wrong. So I spend every day trying to get a little less wrong. And I think that's what you have to do if you're a Christian, is spend every day trying to get a little less wrong about the things you think. Especially for Libby, have you really just left the church or have you left the faith?
There's a lot of fundamental principles, and my dad and I have talked about this a lot. Biblical principles, I think, that are asserted in the Bible, asserted in the Christian faith, that I simply just do not agree with or believe in. And things like, homosexuality being a sin or being a thing you shouldn't do, and lots of other things as well. I don't ascribe to that. Do I believe that there is a God in the universe that might look similar to the God that Christianity believes in? Sure.
So Jordan, where are you right now?
Yeah, so I am very active in the church. My faith is something that is really important to me, and it's really strong. It's the strongest it's ever been. And I have the closest ties to church as an establishment than I ever have in my life. A big part of that is finding a church that definitely is preaching on the Bible rather than, a fun story or and a big part of it is I'm involved in a recovery ministry. It's really about recovering your identity in Christ rather than recovering from an addiction or some like fatal flaw. So it's not just about reaching out to the people who are addicted to crack. It's reaching out to the people who are suffering with daily idols. Like I struggle with control and comfort idols, and it's not a major thing. It's not it's not an exciting story that I'm going to stand up in front of a congregation one day and say, this is my big life struggle. I like to control things, but it's the thing that like leads me to sin more than anything else. And that's, I need the church to hold me accountable to that.
Folks, you're listening to The Disciple Dilemma, a conversation with a nun and an undone nun. And Raymond Rose hosting this one today. We'll be back in just a moment. Folks, we're talking with Jordan Grenadier and Libby Allen. This is a conversation with a nun and an undone nun.
If a leader was going to make the church a meaningful organization that really advances the kingdom of God in their own internal understanding, what would you recommend that leaders should do, focus on, try to accomplish?
Not casting judgment exactly, but the concept of deciding what is and isn't right as per, the Bible's standards is a huge deterrent to many people who, wouldn't consider themselves Christians, but it's certainly keeping them from exploring that more because while, you can say, well, this is what I believe in it. I believe what I believe says, don't do this or don't do this way. That's bad. It's bad for you. I would say that many people fundamentally disagree with that concept, whatever that concept might be. And so they feel like there's no place for them there in the first place. Why would they bother trying to explore or express who they are or what they want or what they think with a group of people that wouldn't give them the time of day outright from their perception, right? So I would say the coming to terms with the reality that as Christians are going to say, well, here's what I think and here's what I believe, and I believe you can't do this this way. It's not right. So really, coming to terms with that as a religious institution and understanding that that puts up a lot of walls.
And I think you're spot on that having a church culture that's trying to create this sort of illusion of moral perfection is problematic. And that's always going to turn people off. So, Libby, if I was going to ask you where you belong, where's the place you feel like you're really at home or you really accept or you really belong? Where do you really belong these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I am a bit of a nomad. I've wandered around a lot from New Orleans to Boston to DC to Austin. So geographically speaking, I don't like to stay in one place for very long. And when it comes to like emotionally and mentally kind of where I belong, I build a community for myself. That's something that I think a lot of people our age do well now because people they don't live where their families are or where they necessarily grew up all the time. And so getting out there and building a community for yourself is sometimes challenging. And that's really what creates that sense of belonging. I tend to collect close friends from lots of different corners of my life and just kind of con them into staying around and hanging out with me. So that's mostly what I do. I don't know about Jordan.
do you accumulate them over the years so that you still have them in Boston and DC and other places, or is friendship just a current environment you're in?
Oh yeah, no, it's there. I mean, for me anyways, we're lifers.
So Jordan, where do you belong?
Similar to Libby, I have moved around a bit, though haven't covered quite as much ground as she has. And so for me, it's been a similar experience of building community where I've, found myself. And I've been in the Austin area for the last few years and have really built up a solid community of friends who are pretty much like family. And so when I think about where I belong, it's definitely, I have a great, really solid community here, and definitely see myself belonging within that group. And so it's a mix of friends who have become family.
How much of that is consistent across the groups of friends you have, and how much of it requires that you have a different approach when you're in different communities?
I think that there is, at least in my experience, there is definitely in life, you can tend to be a little bit of a chameleon in different scenarios, right? Like the hat that I wear when I'm working with clients may be different than the hat that I wear when I'm talking to my parents versus the hat that I wear when I'm going to happy hour with friends. But I still operate from, I think that I have a pretty solid value system that doesn't really change. So where, I may talk with friends about a trashy reality TV show that I watched, I probably won't talk to clients about that, right? But it doesn't make me a different person. I still have kind of this like core values and things like that. But I think part of it is, being able to make conversation with certain groups that you're talking to, and yeah.
So Libby, do you have more of a sense of what you think is correct so that you act more consistently across groups and expect people to accept you? Or do you try to fit in?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. So like Jordan said, everybody has a tendency to be sort of chameleon-like, and that doesn't betray any sense of genuineness in like who you are. It's simply a matter of meeting different people where they're at, socially speaking, different types of relationships you've formed. So for me, I mean, all of my friends tend to have certain things in common. And, Jordan is very different from, some of my friends in Austin, some of my friends in New Orleans. Everybody's very different, but there are certain commonalities that come into play. So like, for example, the thing that comes to mind with me and Jordan, we have very different viewpoints on the world, but we enjoy talking about them, and we have a really good dynamic in doing that. And so when it comes to fitting in with different groups of people, I would say, sure, I can meet people on a different page than I might meet other friends. But in general, I'm just me. Sometimes it's just a slightly different version of me. I think most people can relate to that.
What is it that would make someone that you would value, or someone that you'd really spend time trying to get closer to and developing a deeper relationship with?
Yeah, so for me, it's the ability to talk about things I consider just real. I'm not great at small talk and having a million sort of acquaintances as friends. I'm much more of someone that wants to go, a mile deep and an inch wide with people. And so to that end, usually someone who I can just sit down and have a real conversation with and I have to have that, or otherwise we're just acquaintances, and I don't mind saying hi to you in the hallway, but I don't really want to go grab a glass of wine with you. So if I can have a good conversation with you, we're pretty much golden. What
would you consider things that are real? Is that a philosophical, an art, a cultural? What is it that makes something real?
For me, that's a very subjective question. So it can be anything from an emotional state that I'm in, or that person is in, that they're able to just genuinely express, to an opinion they have about a movie or a TV show, or just a conversation about a podcast that we both have in common. It can be as surface level or as deep as it can be. And there's a lot of people that I've met in my life where I thought, oh, this is a friendship or a relationship that could go really, really well, and then it turns out that there's actually not that much there. So those things change too.
So is it more the authenticity, sort of the transparency of the person to the reality of who they are that really is attractive to you? Or is it the depth of their sort of engagement?
I would say it's all of that, and it's very nuanced. It's there's a term, we use this term a lot in our generation. There's just a vibe. People have a vibe, and you kind of are drawn to it or you're not. And, it's different for everyone, and everyone's, has their own individual unique vibe, and you're kind of attracted to it or you're not. And I would describe a vibe as just the way in which you carry yourself.
What is it that really is common about the friends that you make in the communities that you're in? What really draws you into those places?
Really similar to what Libby said. I think when I look at all of my close friends, there is just a level of authenticity across the board. People who really know themselves or want to know themselves better. I think there's a certain level of personal growth and development that's always happening with the people that I'm closest with. Definitely an ability to express their emotions, people who can go beyond saying I'm fine or it's fine. It's, really getting deeper than just fine. So people who are authentic, are working on who they are. People who are just real and themselves.
Who do you want to be? What do you think is meaningful about what you do and contribute?
Truly, I'm the best version of myself now than I've ever been. And I hope to continue on that same trajectory. I am the most in touch with who I am and what my emotions are and how I feel about things and how I show up in the world and how I communicate with people. And so my hope is that I would stay on that same path for the rest of my life. And so when I think about like what legacy would I leave, right? Or if I died tomorrow, what would people say at my funeral, kind of thing? Definitely that I served people well, that I was a good friend, that I was a good listener and a good leader at times. That's the way that I hope that I show up.
Libby, what do you want to be? What do you want to leave?
I want to be exactly who I am right now. If you'd asked 12-year-old Libby what would be the coolest version of grown-up Libby, it would be, this is what I wanted to be. There are a lot of different competing versions of myself in my head. So, for example, I have a good friend who's a body painter, and she paints 2 days a week, makes a lot of money doing that. She doesn't do anything else. She does yoga and writes poetry and just enjoys her time and her life. And I think that sounds amazing. I want that. And then there's a whole other piece of me that doesn't allow that, right? I have to work really hard and kind of like grind myself down to prove something to myself. But globally speaking, this is the version of myself that I am proud of, that young Libby would have been proud of too.
Are you really the same person online that you are in person?
Yeah, I'm not a professional influencer like Jordan, but I kind of am like a tourist on social media. I like to project an authentic piece of myself. I'm pretty close. I don't put a lot of personal information out online. I will post thoughts and opinions occasionally, but for them, and maybe at places that I go or cool pictures that I take. But for the most part, I'm not one to sort of I have a lot of friends, and I know a lot of people who will just, they're not holding back anything. Social media is as much of whatever version of their life they want to put out there. And I'm not quite like that. I would say that the parts of my life that I choose to portray on social media are very straightforward. It's just me. But there's a lot that I don't put out there, and it's all a curation. I mean, I think a lot of social media that is all it is. It's your ability to curate the parts of you that you want other people to see.
So Jordan, she pointed to you as being the real expert here. Tell me about yourself and social media. You're the same person. What do you do on social media?
Yeah, so I'm definitely the same person. I don't, I don't think I portray myself differently or anything like that, but it is definitely it's a curated version of who I am, right? And a big part of that is that social media is very much sharing with the world, and I don't owe every version of me to the world. There are some parts of me that are kept for close relationships and, that don't need to be shared with every single person I've met. So yeah, it's definitely, it's a highlight reel. It's a curated experience of the things that I do. And yeah, I also don't post that often. I am more of a browser.
This is lightning round. So Jordan, explain discipleship to me as a brand new believer.
It's the concept of sharing the thing that you believe and giving people a window into a new reality that they may not have experienced before, giving them an opportunity to know grace and love that they may not have experienced before.
Libby, on the ever famous feeling wheel, your feelings toward the organized Christian church.
Off the mark.
Oh, good answer.
Okay.
It wasn't even a feeling answer, though.
That sounds like an answer Raymond would give. I was hoping for something a little more heartfelt there, but okay.
I thought it was a great answer.
Very clinical. Did you guys talk before this or something? Okay, Jordan, back to you. So just assume that I'm playing the role of Screw Tape right now, C.S. Lewis's famous character that was always trying to mess up the Christian's life. What's it going to take to get you to leave the organized church? Give me a few things that I can use to help get you out of there.
Abandoning core principles. If the church were to completely disregard the Bible as the basis, and this is something that I've experienced before, churches who lean too much into what's happening in the world, rather than kind of taking an approach of what the Bible says about things and kind of sticking to that.
Libby, the characteristics of a church that you would be most willing to join on to today would look like what?
I think just flat out a very liberal church would be one that might be able to pull me in. I think one that's based on heavy charity work, heavy helping out the poor and the wretched. That's something that would pull me in. A lot of outreach to the homeless, ex-cons, people that are just considered the worst of society. That's kind of where I would be like, okay, well, this is interesting. Let's see where this goes.
Oh, wow. So you're an Anglican. Pretty much.
Jordan, the question I want to ask you is, what would you say is the greatest friction between the worldview you have and the worldview Libby has in your friendship?
I don't think there is one. I think that we both have certain beliefs and certain values that may be different from each other, but at our core, those are the things that make us who we are. And we both respect each other. I think because we each know who we are, that we're not, we're not just coming in with this kind of like fluid, I don't know who I am. And so I don't think there's friction. Do you think there's friction?
No, I don't think there's friction. I think that something that's interesting to certain people is the concept, because especially right now today, having Christians and non-Christians like co-mingle with each other is just like the weirdest thing. A lot of like liberals and conservatives, you could probably do a comparison there too. And again, like the concept of having a respect for those differences of opinion, a strong understanding of who you are as a person, and being able to interact with people who don't believe the same things that you do is crucial. It would be really, really boring if all of my friends believed all of the same things that I do.
Okay, then I'll pitch the last one back to Jordan since you kind of took that one up. So Jordan, what's been the most common religious conversation between you and this person sitting to your right?
Probably around our backgrounds in church and what our experiences were with church and family, and how church played a role in our upbringing. That's probably the conversation that has come up the most.
What would you give me as a wrap-up comment about what should the church think about with your generation over the next few years, if it could change anything?
If the church wants to attract younger people, I think a big part of it is they need to be willing to meet people where they're at. There is, when I was first getting back involved in church, it was difficult for me to find a place because I wasn't a student anymore. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. And so I was in this kind of gray area of there wasn't programming, or there wasn't, there wasn't a specific thing for me. And like we talked about earlier, where, people our age do want more, specific labels, or they don't want to be lumped in to this like broad generalization of who we are. And I don't think churches need to try to meet people at every specific label that they're at. I think if churches focus on being a welcoming place for everybody, no matter where they're at, that's the way that they're going to get people our age.
I would actually say the exact same thing. As someone who, I'm fundamentally opposed to some of the like core tenets that the church espouses, but if I had something to say to get them to reach out to more people, it would be exactly that.
Folks, you've been listening to The Disciple Dilemma. This was a conversation with a nun and with an undone nun. We've been talking with Libby and we're talking with Jordan over in Austin, Texas. And Jordan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Happy to be here.
Oh, delighted that you were with us. Libby, thanks for being with us today. It's great to see you.
Absolutely.
And Raymond, as always, thanks for keeping this thing straight and clean and legit.
It's been fun.
Please take a look at www.discipledilemma.com. We're out there on Facebook. Again, The Disciple Dilemma. We're on Instagram at The Disciple Dilemma. We're at YouTube on Disciple Dilemma, and even all the RSS feeds on a thing called The Disciple Dilemma. We really would appreciate it if you would follow us on Facebook. Doesn't cost you anything. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Doesn't cost you anything. Just click the little red button on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Helps us get leverage in the crowded digital marketplace. We're trying to get the message out that discipleship has been hacked. And the only way we're going to be able to deal with that hack is to understand the dilemma and where we as believers, especially leaders in the church, need to go with that. And always, thanks for listening.